Welcome back, everyone, to The Power You Have. I'm your host, Pramila Jayapal, and I'm thrilled to have you here with me today. This podcast is a space for us to talk about, in depth, how we use our power to stand up for what we believe in and how we build a better country, a stronger movement. Whether you're an organizer all your life and you've been working to hone your advocacy skills for years, or whether you're just learning to find your voice and get engaged for the first time, this podcast is the place for you. We are living through a time where there are so many voices and powers working to silence us. And it's never been more important that we each work to build our own power and to together build a stronger movement. We have an incredible show for you today. We have two remarkable guests. But I wanted to first just share some incredibly exciting news. This week, the House of Representatives nearly unanimously passed the discharge petition to release all the Epstein files. Now, you'll remember a few weeks ago on this very podcast, we had Haley Robson and Jenna Lisa Jones, two of the remarkably brave Epstein survivors, to talk about their experience and their fight for justice. And I hope you'll go back and listen to that podcast, because I'll tell you, these women's voices really deserve to be heard. It is their bravery, their courage that made possible what happened yesterday. And that is truly amazing. As we were all standing at a vigil celebrating the victory in the House passing the Epstein files, release all the Epstein files vote, we were standing together to call on the Senate to pass the resolution quickly. And let me tell you, the Senate is not a body that works quickly. Usually we pass something here in the House, and then we really have to put a lot of pressure on the Senate, and we have to wait a long time. But as we were standing at that vigil, the Senate passed the same bill, the same legislation, demanding that the Department of Justice release all the Epstein files. So now it's passed the House, it's passed the Senate, and it is on the president's desk waiting to be signed. This was just such a beautiful and powerful moment of hope for these women who have fought so hard and waited so long to really, truly be heard. I'm recording this episode on Wednesday. It may even be possible that by the time it gets out at the end of this week, maybe Donald Trump will have signed this bill to finally force the Department of Justice to release all the Epstein files and to ensure that every single person that's involved, not just in the assault of girls, but every single person who covered it up, who turned a blind eye, who protected pedophiles instead of our kids, that we hold those people accountable. This was such an important moment, and I was so honored to have met with and built relationships with the women leading this fight, and I'm going to continue to do everything in my power to push for transparency and justice for them. So don't forget to listen to that podcast episode with Haley and Jenna Lisa. All right, so let's pivot now to today's show. We're going to have two guests on to talk about different sides of a huge issue in this country, and that is the expansion of immigration detention by the Trump administration. Since President Trump took office, the use of immigration detention has skyrocketed to absolutely unprecedented levels, with over 66,000 people detained, which is a record high. And ICE still has plans to increase its detention capacity by the end of the year to detain thousands more, using the $45 billion, billion with a B, enacted in the Republicans' Big Bad Betrayal bill that they passed a couple of months ago. That money is going to expand the detention system in this country and separate even more families and inflict cruelty and chaos on so many people across this country. Now, while those numbers are record-breakingly bad on their face, it's also really important to know that more than 71% of the people who have been detained have absolutely no criminal record or conviction. They are not a threat to our public safety or anywhere near the worst of the worst that Trump said he would go after. They are parents, workers, people just trying to get by and live the American dream. And about 90% of the people who are being held in immigration detention are held in these for-profit facilities, which have a long record of cutting corners on essential services like food, toothbrushes, blankets, all to pad their bottom lines. There have been horrific stories of overcrowding, of medical neglect, of the aggressive use of solitary confinement, of people sleeping on the floor and picking maggots out of their food. And it's really important to note that since Donald Trump came into office, more than 23 people have died in ICE custody. That is a remarkably higher amount than under the Biden administration in previous years. In 2024, there were 12 people who died. In 2023, there were only 4. In 2022, it was 3. And while any death is shocking, it's not difficult to see why these deaths have increased so dramatically. Not only were these facilities not meant to hold as many people as they do, but these for-profit detention centers also care most about making a buck more than keeping people safe. Here's another shocking piece of this. ICE is required to report how many deaths happen in custody, and I also get notified of each death because I'm the ranking member, which means I'm the top Democrat on the Immigration Subcommittee. And I'll tell you, the public numbers they put out do not match up with the private notices that I get. So not only are people dying in their custody, they are not following the legally required reporting guidelines. And it really makes you wonder, so what else are they hiding? All of this is as ICE and DHS have been blocking members of Congress from conducting unannounced inspections, something that is within our legal jurisdiction to do, and actually something that we are required to do given our oversight role. Section 527 of the Consolidated Appropriations Act 2024 explicitly states that the Department of Homeland Security cannot prevent members of Congress from, quote, entering for the purpose of conducting oversight any facility operated by or for the Department of Homeland Security used to detain or otherwise house aliens. And the law goes on to state that nothing in this section may be construed to require a member of Congress to provide prior notice of the intent to enter a facility for the purpose of conducting oversight. All around, they are breaking the law. And we have filed a lawsuit. Members of Congress have filed a lawsuit challenging the fact that they're not letting us into these facilities according to the law. They are tearing families apart in the process. In Chicago, in LA, now in Charlotte, North Carolina, they are traumatizing kids and forever changing people's lives. They're destroying local economies and with zero real results to show for it. Take, for example, the raid that was conducted in Chicago on an apartment building. Agents rappelled from helicopters in a scene reminiscent of a war zone to raid an apartment building that was supposedly filled with members of the Tren de Aragua gang. Some people were pulled out of their beds in the middle of the night. Children, some of whom were naked, were zip-tied and kept from their parents for hours. And after the raid, the administration claimed that they had captured 2, quote, confirmed gang members. Stephen Miller even claimed that it was, quote, one of the most successful law enforcement operations that we've seen in this country. However, it is now a month and a half later, and prosecutors have not filed a single criminal charge against anyone who was arrested in the raid. They have literally provided zero information showing that anyone was involved in any way with Tren de Aragua. Now, Trump has turned his sights from Chicago to Charlotte, North Carolina, where more than 100 people were kidnapped on Saturday at the start of Operation Charlotte's Web. That's what they're calling it, where they literally raided a church. Some of those people are now in immigration detention, facing the same awful conditions I talked about earlier and that you're going to hear about from our guests. Border Patrol agents stopped one U.S. citizen twice, breaking his car window. As this horror continues to expand across the country, I am preparing to introduce legislation to address the crisis of detention in this country. My bill, Dignity for Detained Immigrants Act, urgently reforms the alarming injustices of a broken, for-profit immigration detention system by ending the use of private detention facilities altogether, repealing mandatory detention, and prohibiting family detention, while also restoring due process and increasing oversight, accountability, and transparency. To learn more about this legislation, please be sure to follow my social media channels, Rep. Jayapal, across channels, to stay up to date as we prepare to introduce it. And if you don't live in my district, please call your member of Congress and ask them to sign on as an original co-sponsor to the Dignity for Detained Immigrants Act. All right, now to talk about all of this, let me bring on my two guests for this episode. Heidi Altman is the Vice President of Policy at the National Immigration Law Center. Heidi's work focuses on federal legislative and administrative advocacy to advance the rights of immigrant communities. She has a background that includes years of supervising and providing deportation defense to people who are facing immigration court and appellate proceedings, and building programs to defend the rights of those in the criminal, legal to deportation pipeline. Joining us as well is Juan Montano Perez, who is going to be able to share his very personal perspective on this conversation. Federal agents snatched his mother off the streets in Chicago, and she was held in ICE detention until just a few weeks ago. She has thankfully been released, and Juan, who is a U.S. citizen, will share with us what it was like for his family to have had her detained and what the process was like for his family going forward. So thank you both so much for being here today on The Power You Have. Heidi and Juan, welcome to the program, and thank you so much for being with us today to help shed light on this detention system and what's actually happening. Heidi, I want to start with you just on the whole premise of immigration detention. You and I have worked together on this for so long, but a lot of people don't understand what immigration detention is and is not supposed to be. And so can you just briefly talk about how the system works? Why are we locking up so many people in what we call immigration detention? And then who's actually in these detention centers and why are they there?
Sure. Thank you so much for having us, Congresswoman and Juan. It's such a pleasure to meet you. So I'll start by saying that we call it the immigration detention system, but it's kind of a euphemism because really what we're talking about is a network of nearly 200 jails and prisons. So the same jails and prisons where someone would be placed if they were charged with a crime or serving a sentence is where ICE is putting people they're picking up in our neighborhoods. And it's incarceration. So who runs these facilities? Some of them are run by ICE, a small percentage. Most are operated by private prison companies who are profiting, and some by county jails. And who's there? People who are there are people who are in some way in the immigration system. So some have recently arrived and are seeking asylum or some other protection here. But right now, increasingly under this administration, who's there is our neighbors. People who've lived in the United States for a long time who ICE is picking up and starting deportation proceedings against them. And in some cases, they do that shortly after the Trump administration terminates the lawful status that they had there, making them vulnerable to detention. This is despite the fact that study after study after study shows that people voluntarily will show up for their immigration court hearings. That detention is not necessary to make sure people comply because there's a great incentive for people to go to their immigration court hearings. They want to have a resolution to their case. So we can talk more about it. You know, I often will say that I think two things have driven the growth of immigration detention in the United States, and that's racism and profit. And it's resulted in a really deadly system for the people detained inside.
Why is it even called detention? Because when you really look at it, it is incarceration. And in fact, increasingly, as they search for more space for so-called detention, they have used, as you said, jails, because we started to finally decriminalize certain things in the criminal justice system. This is not the criminal justice system, right? Talk briefly about the difference between the civil system and the criminal system, and why we even call this detention, and whether or not people get attorneys. That's, I think, also important for people to know.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's called detention because legally it's not supposed to be punishment. It's not supposed to be punitive. It's like a traffic ticket. It's a administrative violation, or an allegation of an administrative violation that the government is saying you violated your immigration status or you don't have authorization to be here. No one is in the immigration detention system because they are being charged with a crime. They are there because the government is trying to deport them. And it's not supposed to be punitive, but we can say that. And then you can talk to someone like Juan's mom who's lived through it and will tell you that it was clear they were being punished. So, I think that I would also just note that this administration is being really creative with the ways they make it more and more punitive, right? So now we have immigration detention on military installations and state-run facilities like what is being referred to as Alligator Alcatraz. And so it's just
in Florida.
In Florida, right? So just growing and growing in layers of impunity.
Well, that's great sort of background for anyone who doesn't really understand what this immigration detention, immigration incarceration system is. And so let me go to Juan, because I think your mother's story and your own experience, Juan, really get to the heart of it. And I just want to thank you so much for being willing to share your story and to help people understand, the deep injustice and the deep trauma of what happened to your mom and to your family. So just let's start by sharing your mother's story. How long, who is she to you, obviously? How long was she in detention? How did she get there? And what were her conditions like?
Yeah. And I'd like to start off by thanking you for having me. And of course, I'm happy to share the story and hopefully get the message and all these stories across. Hopefully that helps with our situation and everyone's situation. So last month in October, my mom was working. She works as a tamale vendor, and she's been at it for we now have discussed it and realized it's been about 16 years, just under 16 years.
Wow.
She's been a vendor, and so again she was working, and around 10 in the morning is when one of the ice trucks, unmarked, I believe, by the way, pulled up into the parking lot that's right behind her stand. And two agents came out of the truck. The third stayed in the truck, just behind her stand. And they went up to her. They asked to see her papers. And when she couldn't show them any, they took her into the van. And after that, she was detained for just under 2 weeks. It was 13 days to be exact. So thankfully, when she was taken, she basically pleaded with them to let her make a call. So she was able to call me pretty soon after that, as she was on her way to Broadview. And so I immediately found out through her. She's the one that called me. And right after that, there were people from the rapid response team that were also reaching out, thankfully, right? Which kind of is what really fit in. Once I heard from them, I was still kind of in denial when my mom called me. I almost didn't really believe it. But when I saw the rapid response team, I kind of knew it was, it was happening. And so that's when I really kind of started to look for answers and help and reach out to, whoever I could, and looked for an attorney. And eventually I did find one that explained to me about the about a habeas petition, which is
Mm-hmm.
really what helped our situation, I believe. Um, my mom was taken without any warrant. She has no criminal record, and really no reason to be detained. And really the only reason they went up to her was because she was a street vendor. And you guys kind of touched on that already, about like the discrimination and the racism. And so I believe, especially here in Chicago, a lot of our vendors have been getting targeted because it's um, a job that uh, many immigrants kind of gravitate towards. Um, but Eventually, when I found a lawyer, they explained to me a habeas petition, and y- they told me that they expected her bond to be denied at immigration court. Um, and so the habeas petition would take the issue of her detention specifically outside of immigration court into a federal court, which is where we could really argue the basis for her being detained, and staying in detainment. Again, she didn't have any criminal record and she was no threat. And there's no reason that she has to be kept in detainment while we process her immigration proceedings. But sure enough, eventually her court was denied, um, in immigration court, or her bond, I should say, sorry. Um, but thankfully, because we had placed that habeas petition, um, that really helped us out, and our petition was granted. Eventually, like I said, 13 days later, she was released. So now we're going through the process of immigration court, while she's not detained. But that was the biggest issue that I was having, because like you said, that they are being detained and kept in essentially jails. When my mom was taken into custody, she was taken to Broadview. We've already heard a lot of stories about those conditions there, and you know, how tight packed and just
Which is supposed to be a temporary holding facility, right? It is not
yeah,
supposed to be, it was never meant to be a place that would detain people for 14 days.
yeah.
I think it's supposed to be, is it 24 hours or 48 hours, Heidi? I can't remember, but that's what was supposed to be happening, correct?
Yeah, that's correct. And ICE is doing this across the country. They're using these sort of field offices, really, that were meant for, sort of interviews and meetings and short-term conversations. And they're forcing people to sleep there in really wretched conditions. And it also makes it really hard for people to find their loved ones. I don't know, Juan, if you experienced that.
Because they're not actually entered into the system, is my understanding. So
Right.
had she not been able to call you, Juan, you may not have known even where she was. And I know
Right.
that there are many people who don't know where their loved ones are because they're not entered into the system when
Yeah.
they're just in Broadview. So tell us what she described to you about the conditions she was being held in.
So she was detained in several facilities.
Mm-hmm.
So first she was taken to Broadview, and like you said, it was a processing center. She wasn't processed till the night after she was taken. So she was taken on Friday morning, and I didn't get her a number, that she gets when she's processed till Saturday night.
Wow.
Um,
So 24 hours and you weren't able to,
yeah,
other than that she had called you, you wouldn't have known.
right.
Mhm.
I kept, trying to look her up without her a number, just using her name, on the ICE tracking website, and she didn't pop up. When she was able to call me and tell me her a number on Saturday, she still didn't show up on the system till Sunday morning.
Mm.
But anyway, after Broadview, she was taken into Indiana, um, and then from Indiana, she was taken to Kentucky.
Mm.
Um, and then after Kentucky, she was brought back just across the border back into Indiana, because of our habeas. So she was in at least 4 facilities that I'm aware of.
Wow.
Um, as far as Broadview, I know she's told me that it's again really jam-packed with a lot of people. There's really no space for anyone to sleep. They kind of have to sleep either on the floor, sitting up, or kind of just trying to, get some shut-eye, like standing up even.
Mm.
And she said that the entire time there, she was also very cold. Um, she works in the cold, right? She works as a
Mm.
vendor. She works outside. She works during the heat in the summer, and works in the cold weather. Um, and even at the facility, she was cold. She had jackets on that day because it was starting to get chilly. And she said that at Broadview, they when they brought her in, I guess they had her take off her jackets and that kind of thing. She eventually asked for her jackets back because of how cold it was. And she says that the officer or agent that had them um, told her just no, and then threw them out into the trash bin right in front of her.
Mm.
So she was, the conditions there not very kind to say the least. And again, so she had nowhere to sleep. Food was very limited, right? Very kind of small meals. And then from there, she was taken into Indiana, which from my understanding, what she has told me, she hated even worse.
Oh.
Similar conditions. They were sleeping on the floor with a thin blanket. She was freezing. The meals were barely enough to get her through the day. She would say it was just like a small sandwich and an applesauce. Um, she was getting the 3 meals, but it was very tiny. And then when she was taken into Kentucky, she said the conditions there were a little better. She actually had like a bunk bed to sleep on. Um, uh, there were less of them crammed into a room. And thankfully they were all very nice amongst each other. So it seemed like she was in better spirits there. But once they brought her back into Indiana again, when she called me from there, she told me once again that they had her sleeping on the floor. She also mentioned that she wasn't really getting access to water, that they would have to drink water from the bathroom tap water or sink where they wash their hands. And that's if they could find like a empty water bottle that no one was using, they could fill it up from there. Um, but it was just a very scary situation for her, right? Because
Of course.
she's
Yeah.
not a criminal, and she was in a cell, kind of being punished as one, and not really having any resources to do anything there.
Mm-hmm.
And the entire time, my mom is diabetic. So this entire time, when I knew she was still in Broadview, when she called me to tell me her A number, I was able to go drop off her medication at Broadview. I was told I could leave it with an officer outside the facility, and they could take it into the facility to give it to her. When she was transported the day after to Indiana, and the entire time she was held in Indiana, she didn't get her medication.
Oh my
Um,
gosh.
once she was taken to Kentucky, the few days that she was there, they eventually got her medication and was able to take it for a couple of days, or a few days while she was there. But when they transported her back into Indiana again they didn't give her medication. And so that entire time that she was back in Indiana, before we could settle the habeas petition and get her released, she again wasn't getting
She
her
didn't have
medication.
any of her medication.
So
So
for yeah.
Heidi, I want to ask you about conditions, because this is just something that we've worked on for such a long time. Why are there no standards around detention facilities? Why is it that Juan's mother was held the way she was? the lack of consistency, the inability to get food, water, a reasonable place to sleep, your medication. What is happening with these detention facilities, and how should Americans understand the lack of accountability around conditions in these facilities?
This system is literally designed to break the spirit of the person who's detained. So, what you're describing, Juan, what's happening right now is that this administration is figuring out every lever they possibly can to be even more effective toward this goal of breaking people's spirits so that they will essentially agree to give up their rights. There's no law, there's no regulation that governs or requires certain standards in detention. There's various sets of guidelines that ICE has issued over the years, and different facilities are required to follow different standards. All of them are very minimal. All of them were modeled after criminal detention standards. They're carceral standards, right? They should not ever be the standard that's used for a civil detention system. And what's happening now, Juan, I was waiting when you said, you delivered the medicine, and I was just certain that was going to come next was that she didn't get the meds, because this is happening everywhere. We have heard several cases just in recent weeks of people who were receiving treatment for cancer when they got detained, and who are contemplating taking deportation simply so they won't die while they're in custody because they're not getting any treatment or medical care. And the last thing I'll say on this is that there's the conditions, like there's worms in the food and the water is not drinkable and all of this, but there's also these structural issues that the administration is making sure make it impossible for people to vindicate their own rights. So you asked earlier, Congresswoman, about legal representation. This administration terminated the only program that allowed lawyers to go into detention centers and provide just basic know your rights orientations.
The legal orientation program, completely defunded.
Only about a third of people in detention are able to get a lawyer, like Juan's mom was. And ICE has also stripped away their willingness to give bonds. So most people in detention, ICE won't even consider for a bond. And the only way to access a judicial determination in the way that Juan's mom did is to file a habeas petition. But figuring out how to access the federal court system, totally separate from your immigration court case, is really out of reach for most people. And even if you have an immigration lawyer, often that lawyer doesn't practice in the federal court system. So it's just, layer after layer after layer of deprivation of due process rights, and making it so that people are so separated from their loved ones, so broken down in terms of their spirits, that they end up feeling like the only way they'll be able to get their life back is to just accept deportation.
Which I think is something that we heard, across the board in our shadow hearings when we were in Chicago, but also in all the work I've done over the years on this, is that the lack of respect and dignity and basic rights is so demeaning and horrific for somebody like your mom, Juan, who I remember when I first met you, you were talking about how your mother is just such an outgoing person and she just loves selling tamales. She loves her business and she loves all her customers and everybody has known her. And even with everything that was happening, even as you were telling her to be careful, because of the increased presence, that she was like, no, I love my business. I love my work. I love my people. I love what I do. And so clearly this is a woman who has tremendous spirit, as do so many of the people that are picked up and treated unfairly. I want to know, Juan, for you, and what it's been like. I mean, tell the people who are listening a little bit about you, and also what it was like for you, and what it still is like to have to deal with potentially, not having your mom for 2 weeks and potentially what may happen to her. What's the impact been on you and on the rest of the family?
Well, especially those 2 weeks, it's pretty gut wrenching. It's very scary, my mom is pretty much my strongest support system. I've lived with her my whole life. She's the one that's raised me. And we have a lot of family here that just love and adore her. And thankfully when she was taken and I called some family members to let them know, right? A lot of them were willing to help and ready to, support in any way they could. Um, and so none of us want to see her go. Um, you know, every now and then, of course, my mom misses Mexico and would like to go visit and that kind of thing. But to like lose her and not be able to see her whenever possible, whenever we'd like. Um, a lot of us here really just would love her and miss her tremendously. And we really want her to be here. And so those 2 weeks was very, very scary, I want to say. And thankfully the habeas was settled when it was, because even just like um 2 nights before, um when my mom was taken back into to Indiana, she was wavering a little bit. Her anxiety was getting to her. Even
Mm-hmm.
she expressed kind of contemplating wanting to sign self-deportation,
Mm-hmm.
just to be out of detainment. And
Yeah.
so you guys mentioned it a little bit earlier, where it's kind of like a psychological warfare type of
Mm-hmm. Totally.
situation. Um, once she was released, she also told me that she was before the initial transportation into Indiana, she was also transported with a few other people that were detained that were being taken to an airport for deportation.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm glad you were Heidi brought it up, because I kind of felt that it's sort of like a mental tactic there to kind of
Yeah.
see that happen in front of them, to also kind of scare some of the
Mm-hmm.
teenies that are just being held at the moment. Um, so I feel like that was also another. I don't see why she would need to be transported with
Right.
in that situation. But for me, those 2 weeks were very anxiety inducing, and I wasn't even in detainment. I can only
Mm-hmm.
imagine what my mom was going through and how scared she was. Every time that I would hear from her, when talking about the next transportation, she sounded very, very scared, and just nervous, because she didn't know when that next transportation would be a deportation. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I was able to tell her, like, just make sure you don't sign anything, and let me handle what I can out here, and I'm doing my best to get you out. um but every time she would hear about potentially being transported again, she was scared that the next one she didn't know where she was going to end up. And just like I said, just a day or two before the habeas was settled, she was almost to the point of signing,
I can't
just
do
to
this
just
anymore.
because she want
Mm-hmm.
just because she wanted it to be over. Thankfully, she did hold up. She is a strong woman. And I hear a lot um from people that they think I'm a hardworking guy. My mom works 10 times harder than I do. So like any traits any positive traits that you might hear about me, or think yourselves about me, she's just that much more. So I really wanted to make sure my mom stayed here, and keep us. I was trying my best to keep us together. Um, and so I'm a bit more relieved now that she's out of detainment. I think we can handle being together. I think it's much easier for us to go
Of
through this
course.
process and handle the situation. Um, and if for whatever reason we can't get her any permission to remain here, we do have family in Mexico. I'm sure she'll be okay. And of course, will go see her whenever possible. Um, but just being able to tackle that in a more timely manner where
Mhm.
we can plan accordingly and take care of
Mhm.
things and set things up versus kind of just being shoved out and then trying to track everyone down because you never know where some of these people are being left off. And you know, you hear stories about people just going missing and disappearing, and
Mhm.
it's a very scary situation. Um, so of course we still have to go through this immigration court proceedings and this process. Um, but I think having her out of detainment is just a lot. The system should work in a way where we can take care of things um, effectively and manage things properly versus the chaos that we have right now, you know?
Yeah.
So I still want to keep her here. I'm still trying to do my best to get her some sort of permission to remain with me here and the rest of our family. We're doing everything we can. But
Well,
it's the detainment process that's just a
yeah,
super
it's
scary
the
situation.
cruelty and the
Yes.
chaos and the lack of respect. And I'm sure she's incredibly proud of you. And I'm sure you are just, one of the main lights of her life. And so both Heidi and I, as moms, also were kind of, feeling very
It's
moved
filling.
as we were listening to you. Um, and I guess, how old are you, Juan?
25 now.
25. So at 25 years old, you're having to think about whether or not your mom can be with you, how to help her, how to get her out of detention. And I know at the round table that we were at with you, there was another young woman who was 19 who was also looking after her younger sibling who had a lot of health issues as well when her mom was detained. And so I think that the situation that we're putting people into, young people into, separating them from their families, some are a little bit older, some are a little bit younger, is just absolutely unnecessary. And I want to come back to you, Heidi, because we are completely out of any norm with other um, similarly wealthy countries, developed countries, whatever you want to call it. And sometimes I don't feel like we're so developed here, but I guess I'm wondering what do other countries do, and then what can we do with legislation, with executive orders to reform these systems and make them more just?
Sure. I'll start with the question about other countries. It's been the case for a long time that the United States has the largest immigration detention system in the world by far. What is happening among many alarming things is that as this detention system grows out of control and more reckless and dangerous and deadly, other countries around the world follow suit, right? So this is the case with like so much about the United States. The United States is seen as a global leader for good or for evil. And so looking around the world, we're seeing increasingly more punitive, more expansive use of detention for immigration purposes in other countries. Mexico now rivals the United States in terms of having the largest immigration detention system, and that's largely because of U.S. policies that are pushing asylum seekers and refugees at our own border back into Mexico. I was reading this morning an alert just from the past couple months out of Belarus, where that country used detention to separate a young mother, a Ghanaian mother, from her newborn baby.
Oh,
The baby was sent to an orphanage and the mom was sent to detention and then deported, which is pulled directly from the
outrageous.
playbook of the Trump administration's use of detention for family separations. So this is what happened. Our horrible, cruel practices get exported globally. This could be fixed. The United States used to, for much of the 1900s, see detention as a last resort, and we need to get back there. Your bill, the Dignity for Detained Immigrants Act, is a roadmap for that, right? And I would encourage everyone listening to call their members and make sure that they are co-sponsoring that bill. there's a lot that could be done without legislation, but we do ultimately need a complete relook at this system that is harming so many and leaving people like Juan without their person. You know, your mom, your dad, your loved one is taken from you, and the ripple effects are generational.
Well, and the thing is, if we had a legal immigration system that actually worked, that allowed people like Juan's mom to be here and to stay here with legal status, a pathway to citizenship for people who have been here for a long time, other ways for family members to come into the country and join their immediate family members, other ways for people to come here on employment visas and have those visas actually work. Those kinds of things would actually, in some ways, make the detention system moot, because we wouldn't have these giant populations of people who have been here, lived here for decades, and had family members, mixed status families, all kinds of things, and are contributing so much to our system. Juan, if you could speak directly to the Trump administration, to the ICE officials who took your mom and countless others like her, what would you say to them?
I mean, I think the main message we should get across to them is, they talk so much about, wanting to deport criminals, or that being their focus. But that's a flat out lie. We've seen it in Chicago, we've seen it in Los Angeles, we've seen it across the country. They're targeting anyone and everyone they can, based off of assumptions and discrimination, just to pump up their numbers, because that's really all they care about. And this first year, of the administration, they've had control of the presidency, they've had control of the Senate and the House. I think they could have very easily pushed for some immigration reform that allowed for many of these immigrants who are here working, and contributing to our economy and our communities, to give them a faster, better way to get status where they can continue to do that. And instead, they're targeting them, and trying to deport them, succeeding in many cases. And in those situations, they can't come back. And so we're losing a lot of people that have been here contributing and helping, build the U.S. to what it is. And so we're just losing a lot of people that have come with nothing but the best of intentions and nothing but wanting to help their loved ones, themselves, their communities. And I don't see why they've been using this much power that they've had so far for cruelty. They could have pushed for something that positive that could have helped those who are here to for good. Those that are here to, there are, I'm sure, some criminals out there, and those, unfortunately, right. There's going to be, amongst citizens and amongst immigrants, there is criminals that it's part of society, unfortunately. But that's I think such a small percentage, and they're labeling everyone across the board as criminals, and we're not getting the humanity, to help those who are here doing nothing but help and contributing. And I wish they would shift the focus from the bad and the criminals, and saying that's who they're going for, and shift the focus to how they can improve the system, and actually trying to push for improving applications, and the process for people to look for permissions and status, to be able to contribute even more. Because, I mean, even my mom, who's been a vendor, there's been a lot of things that she hasn't been able to do because she lacks any status. and for her to have permission to be able to do even more, she would
Yeah.
gladly, you know, jump at that. So that,
Absolutely.
yeah.
She's such a I think she's such a model for you, obviously, for the community. And I know when I was in Chicago, I was in Little Village, and where a lot of ICE and DHS agents were descending, and there were so many vendors and businesses who were suffering. And I think you're right to point out the economic contributions of people like your mom as well, because that Little Village area is second only to the Magnificent Mile, apparently, in terms of economic contributions to the state of Illinois. And, and then, of course, just the dignity of everything I think you've articulated so well. So, Heidi, last question for you. I could keep going forever, but they're telling me I got to wrap. So, last question for you is, we need to educate people about the immigration system, how it works, what it is, what it's doing to people. And I know you just came on. We did a really powerful resistance lab on immigration justice, and we're going to repeat it again. We did it with 1,000 people in 44 states across the country for a 2.5-hour virtual training. It was amazing. For people who are listening, go to resistancelab.us to sign up. We're going to do it again in December. Heidi's going to come back with us. And I guess I have this podcast is called The Power You Have. I think so much of breaking the spirit is happening within detention centers and also outside. Hopelessness and powerlessness are tools of the oppressor. And I think we really need to help people understand how much of a difference they can make on this issue. And so what can people do right now? You mentioned, and thank you, my bill, Dignity for Detained Immigrants, which we are getting ready to reintroduce, and we're already accepting co-sponsors. So obviously people should call their member of Congress to sign on to that. What else can people do who are outraged and horrified by how the Trump administration is treating people like Juan's mom and so many that they see in their communities?
Sure. I'll lift up two other things after you've called your senator and member of Congress about dignity for detained immigrants. One is to connect with a local mutual aid or immigration advocacy organization in your community. And through that organization, you can get involved in a lot of ways. Some of the most impactful ones are accompanying people when they have to go to their immigration court hearing or when they have to go to an ICE check-in. Sometimes just seeing that there's community support in that way deters ICE from detaining a community member. Sometimes the detention happens, but you're there and you formed witness, and then you can be part of the local response to support that family. People who are in situations like Juan's where they're trying to find a lawyer and support their kids sometimes, right? And the support can be life-saving. A second thing I would say is
that where can people find out what mutual aid organization is near them? How do they do that?
Yeah, so that can be tricky. I think going to one of your workshops, Congresswoman, you'll get a lot of resources, but also often truly you can just kind of Google around in your community and find, because it is very localized. And this is one of the remarkable things that I think is happening in this moment, is that the resistance is growing at a very localized level. There may be an organization, not just in your city, but in your neighborhood, right, that is that localized and showing up. And so Google around, ask your neighbors, ask your friends. If you're a parent, ask the PTA, because school communities have become very active, and see how you can plug in that way. The second thing I would say is, for those of you who are listening who have the privilege of having some resources that you might be able to donate somewhere, there are a lot of people stuck in detention who have been able to access bond, but it is very high, thousands and thousands of dollars. And so if you have the resources and you're looking to contribute in a way that directly, helps someone's life progress, helps someone get liberty, could consider contributing to a bail fund. And I would encourage people specifically to look at the Black Immigrants Bail Fund. It's www.blackimmigrants.bailfund.com. They are incredibly overstretched right now in terms of trying to meet the need of people who are looking for resources. And Black immigrants historically have faced disproportionately higher bonds another place where racism shows up in the immigration and detention system. So putting money there can go directly towards helping someone get freedom and be reunited with their loved ones.
What absolutely great suggestions. Juan Montano, we are inspired by you and your mom. I hope you give her our love, and I hope you thank her also for helping to bring you into the world and all that you do as well. Thank you so much for being with us. Heidi Altman, you're a treasure, a national treasure on this issue. Thank you so much for your leadership, for your commitment, for your passion, and for helping us all figure out how to use the power we have. Thank you both.
We're so grateful to you, Congresswoman.
Thank you very much. Thank you.